Join me as we embark on an epic journey of discovery as we find out how the ancient Norse painted their 3D prints. What's up YouTube? We are back once again with a Renegade painting video, and this time we've got none other than Eivor from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I've had a bit of problem already with this model. I originally decided to print the base on my resin printer to use up the last of my high-speed resin, and it didn't quite go so well. So this one got totally ruined. The whole front of the model just did not stick together. My fault. I don't know what I did, but I tried fixing it, used a lot of polyfiller. I just couldn't fix it. So this cost me about £13 in resin, probably about £2 in polyfiller, about 50 pence in milliput, and many, many tears. So instead, I just printed the base on my Bamboo P1S. It's come out much better, much lighter, it's the right size. That was printed at a 0.2 layer height. Eivor himself was printed on my Anycubic Photon Mono M5S Pro. He was done at a 2 micron layer height. But anyway, I've primed everything, I've prepped everything, I've sanded all of the little knobs down as best I can. And now it's time to paint. So let's get into it. So firstly, I'm going to start with the base. Primed it in a grey and then sprayed it with Chaos Black. First thing I'm going to do is just build up a few grey layer colours. Now what I'm going to do, obviously this top part is rock, so I'm going to leave that in the grey colour. But on the bottom part here, I'm going to try and get that a nice glossy black. And then we're going to put a bit of fabric underneath here. So this model is a gift for my friend, which is a gift for his girlfriend. So I need to do a really good job of this one. So we're going to start off with Castle Grey by Army Painter. I've gone a bit heavier in some places, not so heavy in other places. I've left a lot of the cracks slightly darker in black, and yeah, I've gone quite heavy in certain places, as natural rock is not necessarily all the same colour. To help out with making it look a little bit more natural, I'm going to give it a few coats of other colours, which I will be using my airbrush for. Right, I've given the base a little spritz with some Agrax Earthshade and some Hexwraith Flame. I didn't want to go too heavy on the green, I just wanted it to be there for a little bit of saturation. So once I got both the colours randomly sprayed out everywhere, and now I'm going to get back to dry brushing. First thing I'm going to do is give it a very light coat of cold grey, just to bring the grey back up a little bit. Right, quite happy with that. So now I'm going to pick out some of the highlights on the rocks with some Army Painter Ash Grey. So what I'm going to do here is just selectively pick out some of the edges. I'm going to start off with just blocking out all the colours that I'm going to need. Next, I'm giving all the skin coat of tanned flesh as the base coat. What I should also mention is that generally my models tend to be dead things, masked things, or not human things. So I do struggle quite a lot with skin tones and eye details and hair and, you know, generally everything that makes a human a human. This is going to be one of the first models for quite some time where I've had to paint in everything that makes a human a human. So I may do things differently, I may not. I'm still learning, so learn with me, I guess. All right, blue next. I'm going to use dark Prussian blue. Prussian? How do you pronounce that? Tell me in the comments. Next for the red, we're going to go for burnt red. I'm just going to go and tidy back up the bits where I've gone too heavy on the black with, but I may need to go back over on Eivor's scarf thing with some red in a minute. Right, so I've now got the model blocked out with all of the main colours that we're going to use. I've sealed it with a coat of varnish. Now it's time for one of my favourite parts, the completely messiest part, which is putting oil wash on everything. For an oil wash, you need a raggedy paintbrush that you don't use very much, plenty of stuff to clean it up with, some cheap makeup brushes from Temu, and of course the actual oil wash. I've made this myself out of some basic oil paints from any hobby shop and some turpentine substitute or white spirit. I made this with basically a 50-50 ratio of each, the both the paint and the terps, and just give it a good shake. And I use these flimsy little plastic things to put them in, but the terps actually starts to eat through these after a while. You need to be fairly quick with it. My main aim with this one, I'm not going to touch the red because it's already quite dark. I just want to dull the brown and the blue down, so I'm only going to focus on those areas. And what this does, it gets into all the little cracks in the model and it gives it a really nice detailed effect. Right, I've given everything a good coat of oil wash. It's had a chance to get into the model a little bit. So now what I want to do is get the vast majority of it off before it dries. But the good thing about this stuff is that it doesn't matter. Once it's dried, as long as you've sealed your model, you can still take it off. I'm going to give another coat on the boot. I want just a little bit more on this now. So I'm going to put another blob of the oil paint into a tub and just make this next coat a little bit thicker. Still using my same mix, just slightly more. So it's now a lot less runny and has more the consistency of airbrush paint, I would say. I'm just going to go back over the boots. Now it's partially dry. I can see in certain parts that it's starting to sort of come together. So what I'm now going to do is just wipe it off. I'm going to get the bulk of it off with some blue tissue, and then I'm going to get the rest off with my makeup sponges. Right, next what I'm going to do. So I just want to bring some mid-tones up a little bit. So I'm going to use this leather brown, a little bit of a very fine dry brush. So it's adding a lot more yellow into the brown. Right, stage 2, I really need to get some colour into these fur bits. Right, I've just been out and bought this stuff. It looked in the shop like what I wanted to go for with the boots. So I'm going to very, very lightly dry brush it on. So for the legs, I've mixed in a beige with the Brigadier Brown that I had already on my wet palette. I'm hoping that this gives the trousers a kind of canvasy, khaki type kind of look. Now we're going to learn the ancient Nordic art of dulling down your paints a little using Army Painter soft tone wash. We apply this liberally across all of the paintwork, and then dab away the excess. Right, first job for the blue part. I'm going to put some Drakenhof Nightshade down on it just to fill in those darker gaps a little bit. Now while it's drying, I'm going to use some Agra Access shade to actually shade in some of the darker parts on the pants, because although I am going to go in with some panel line and just pick out some of the finer detail eventually, I'm going to do that with the trousers. So I am going to paint the shadows back in now. So while my blue is drying, I'm just going to give a bit of a touch up on that red. I'm going pure red. Now when you're mixing in white with any colour to lighten it, you need tiny little drops, because it works very, very quickly and lightens it up way too much. So in terms of the amount of red that I've got, let's move it in camera a bit. In terms of the amount of red that I've got on the tissue paper compared to the white, it's the tiniest blob. You can already see that it's lightened it up loads compared to the amount of paint. It's the complete opposite when you're trying to darken things. Say if I was trying to darken the brown that I was using earlier with a bit of black, I'd need to add in quite a bit of black to have any sort of effect. Last step on the bottom half of the model is just to pick out some highlights on the blue parts, for which I'm using a flat blue. Yeah, I reckon it's looking good so far. So after many painstaking blobs of black paint around the buckle parts on his boots, I feel like I'm finished with the bottom half of the model. Only thing I think I'm going to do... No, I'm finished. I'm not going to touch that anymore. It's fine as it is. It does get to a point where you're just adding things onto your model for the sake of adding things. So don't get to that point. If you think you're done, you're done. So now I'm going to move on to the arms and get those out of the way. First thing I'm going to do is get a coat of gunmetal grey on the silver parts on the axe. When I was first starting out, I picked up a load of paints and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I picked up this stuff, wood grain, and I used it thinking that it would be, well, it'd give me the look of wood. And now I've got a little bit more experience. I'm thinking that it's probably meant more as a contrast paint because it just doesn't cover well. So now I've got all the axes blocked out. I'm going to go back over the wood here with this wood grain and just see what happens. Right, so it was basically just a colour. I thought I might have filled in the gaps, but I suppose the detail on this part of the model is quite fine and probably wouldn't let any paint run in there, to be honest. So, I mean, either way, the colour is great, so I'm happy with that. Next thing to do is just to paint this handle here. I think I'll do that a burnt red. For the leather on the arms, I'm going to try and just kind of briefly match the colours that I've done for the bottom, and I think I can do that with a little bit of light brown dry brushing. And lastly, the blue on the arms get the same treatment as the pants with a Drakenhof Nightshade wash. Last step now on the arms before I do the flesh tone. That's going to come at the same time as the head. I'm just going to give it a dry brush with some flat blue just to pick out the highlights. I think in terms of detail painting for the arms, I'm going to leave that there. I may come back and just brush a little bit of white or something into this fur around his gloves. In fact, I definitely will, because it doesn't look right. I'll do that now. Right, I'm going to try a bit of this ochre brown as a wash on the fur here. I'm a little bit gutted because that would have solved some of my problems with the shades on the boot if I'd have remembered I actually had this. That's not actually turned out too badly. I'm just going to go over it with the ghost grey, a very light dry brush. So I'm going to use a bit of this ochre brown to dry brush on the chest strap here. Just to keep in with the rest of the model, I'm going to go over the belt with a bit of strong tone just so it's got the same sort of texture and pick out some of those shadows a little bit more in the details. Right, we're on the home stretch now. Finally, it is on to the skin tone. Now for this, I need 3 of my crappy little plastic throwaway pots because we're going to do some washes. But first of all, what I'm going to do, he's got some... I'm not sure whether this is a scar or whether it's a vein. I'm going to go with vein. I'm going to paint it ever so slightly blue just before the wash stage. For that, I'm going to use a pastel blue. Right, we've got the veins painted in. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start off with a blue wash just to pick them out a little bit more and give it the first coat of the blood and sinew type details. So for this, we just need to make sure that the model is sealed. Now I haven't sealed those veins, but I'm not too bothered. The rest of it is sealed, however, so I can start cracking on. Best thing for this wash stage though are these little makeup sponges. So for this I'm going to use a flat blue and just pop in a tiny little bit and then loads of water. Right, so I'm going to pop that aside, so I still need to do the hands. But I'll do that later on. So right now, Eivor looks like he's been frozen to death. So I'm going to warm that back up with a yellow wash. And for this, I'm going to use medium yellow, which is my model air colour. So this is already quite watered down. I'm just going to use a few drops of this and add a little bit of water in. But before anything, I'm going to seal that blue wash in. So I've got a new makeup sponge, and I'm going to do the same thing with the yellow wash. Make them nice and green. Right, next thing is the red wash. Now I'm using pure red for this, from Army Paint. Normally I would use a Vallejo paint, which I don't seem to have anymore. Now I'm really hoping that the Army Paint doesn't bite in too quickly, because the red wash I usually spray with a little bit of alcohol just to break up. I've got the majority of it off, and now what I'm going to do, I've stolen a bottle of body spray from my daughter, and I've filled this with alcohol, so I'm just going to give it a spray on there, and what's going to happen is that's going to break up. I don't know if you can see. And it's going to make the skin look quite blotchy, and also it's going to make Eivor smell like barley breeze, and he's going to smell fantastic. Give this a few coats of the red just to get that skin look back in before I start highlighting the actual skin tones. One thing to remember as well, if you are going to do it this way, you need a spritz spray rather than an actual heavy spray, so otherwise this doesn't work. Don't be afraid of going too crazy with the red. Obviously you don't want to overdo it, but there's supposed to be plenty of blood vessels in skin, so that's what we're putting back in now. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back in around his eyes and just let it pool there a little bit. I'm not going to dry that, spray that, and in his ears as well. So what you want to do is try and have parts where the blood is closest to the surface of the skin a little bit more red. So that's going to be just around the eyes, the cheekbones, forehead, and around the ears, just where the skin's a little bit thinner. We're on track for a really good looking skin tone. So I'm going to let that dry and repeat the process with the hands. Right, next is something that I'm going to experiment a little bit with, because I've never done this before and I'm a little bit worried about how it's going to turn out, but we'll see. So I've done the blue washes, I've done a yellow wash and a red wash. I'm quite happy with his kind of muggy complexion now, and I think a good dose of skin tone will cover that up nicely and bring him to life a bit. But in the past, when I have occasionally done human skin tone, for example, I did a Uhtred of Bebenberg model. I did that with an airbrush. I've also done a Freddy Krueger model. Again, did that with an airbrush using roughly the same sort of thing. But I've never had to do skin tone like this, and I've certainly never done it by hand, which is what I'm going to do now. So with the airbrush, the next coat that I would normally put on, I would use a basic skin tone, very watered down, and just give it a light misting, just to sort of bring it to life. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to water it down more than I would in the airbrush, and I'm going to give it another wash with this and see how it looks afterwards. Okay, so I thought I was recording, it clearly wasn't. I've given it a test on one of the hands, and as you can see, it's made quite a difference to the complexion. So I'm going to give it another go on this hand. I just want to cover up the washes, basically. I don't want to make this his main skin tone, because I will be putting highlights in. Right, so while the hands are drying, I've decided to move onto the head, and rather than mess about with the other colours like I've just done, I'm just going to go straight into the head with Barbarian Flesh. Now, I've also just upped the consistency of it. That's round about what I would normally put in my airbrush, rather than the watery muck that I've been using. There we go. I've found my skin tone. Exactly what I wanted. I'm really pleased with that. I'm going to paint in some tanned flesh into the darker areas in between his hands. Look, a tidier workspace. As you can see, I've made myself a new paint stand, and as you can see, I didn't do it right. So I've just got a laser machine. I don't know how to use it. It hasn't gone correctly at all. It's got gaps in there, but I'm not wasting any wood. It holds the paint, it stands upright, so who cares? But look, tidiness. I'm going to do myself another one of these now I've figured out what was wrong with it, and probably get rid of the 3D printed ones that I've got. I'm also ordering myself for my birthday next month a nice big Army Painter paint set, which includes one of these as well. Today's project, we need to make him look a little bit more lifelike. Now for that, I'm going to be using my dry brush, which is very blue. I'm going to do some highlights with basic skin tone. I'm going to start on the hands. Now the scary part. I don't like these parts around his cheekbones. I think what I may do is put some skin wash on, and hopefully that'll tone that down a little bit. So I'm going to use Vallejo Game Colour Flesh Wash. Just look at how well that wash has picked out the details in his face. It's almost a shame that I'm going to have to give him some war paint. Right, so now this is dry, I'm going to give the eyes and the inside of the mouth a coat in deck tan. I'm using this because it's kind of a grey white, which is a good colour for eyes, and it covers quite well. So I haven't quite painted all the way to the edge. There's a little bit of a gap, and it looks a lot more natural. For the inside of his mouth, I'm going to go with brown rose. Okay, I put some little dots on for reference. You probably can't see on camera. I can barely see here. But I'm going to use my little magnifying glass things just so I can see what the hell I'm doing. Now, I appreciate this isn't going to make for good entertainment because I'm going to have the model pretty much right into my face, but I'll do what I can. So first thing I'm going to do is make a black circle just for the centre of his eye. I've given him some blacks in his eye. I'm going to go over with a bit of pastel blue. I've moved the camera a little bit because I can't see what I'm doing with my usual camera positioning. And now I'm going to give him some nice bright blue Scandinavian eyes. So for this, I'm going to paint into the black, but I'm going to leave a little bit of a border just around the blue parts. Now a tiny dot of cold white. Very happy with those eyes. There we go. Quite happy with them. But I painted his hair firstly starting off with some cork brown from Vallejo, and then a little bit of Iraqi sand, and then some highlights in beige, and then it was far too much. So I toned it down all over with some Agrax Earth shade, and now I think it's matched the rest of the model really nicely. Right, so I've put in some of the panel line, darkened it up a little bit, and now next job is we're going to put his war paint on. Now for this, I'm going to paint around his eyes. Now I'm just going to soak a cotton bud or a Q-tip if you're American in here and kind of use it as a dry brush. Right, here we go then, oil wash time. Got my wash, obviously. I'm armed with plenty of things to clean it up with. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on my makeup sponge and just dab it on again.